For 3 years, I had been married to the Ice Queen CEO. It was nothing more than a marriage in name, a contract that gave us the title of husband and wife, but none of the actual relationship. Then came the day I finally asked for a divorce. She simply looked at me with that same cold, unreadable expression. But suddenly, strange comments started appearing above my head like an invisible Livestream chat. They were talking about chains hidden in the basement. They even claimed that the restraints and little toys down there had all been custom-made to fit me. Another comment mocked me for pretending to be some untouchable goddess while drunk. According to the comments, the moment I finished signing the divorce papers, I would wake up to an entirely different fate. Apparently, I was about to be separated from the woman I supposedly hated the most, and the comments insisted that my nightmare of being imprisoned by her was finally about to begin. They even said the woman had an absurd amount of energy. After everything I had done to provoke her, apparently, I was doomed. The comments claimed that dying from exhaustion would be exactly what I deserved. I stared at those messages and thought, what the hell? Am I missing something? They claimed that if I had shown the Ice Queen even the slightest bit of kindness over the past few years, this hopelessly lovesick woman would have instantly fallen at my feet. Apparently, she would have willingly become my loyal lapdog. Instead, my constant cruelty had turned that love into pure resentment. And somehow, I had managed to push things this far. My hand froze halfway through signing the papers. I looked at the emotionless woman sitting across from me. Then I suddenly blurted out, maybe we shouldn't get divorced yet. The Ice Queen's eyelids barely moved as she looked at me, completely indifferent to my sudden change of heart. Her voice remained cold. She looked like none of this mattered to her at all. For a moment, I couldn't help wondering whether those bizarre comments had all been some hallucination. Had I really seen them? Or was I just losing my mind? I took a deep breath. Then I slowly lowered the pen I had been about to use. I desperately tried to justify myself, telling her that I had suddenly realized I didn't want a divorce anymore. After all, once you're married, there are still feelings between you. We had spent 3 years together. Whether the first liked it or not, we had already become accustomed to each other's presence. And the truth was, maybe I had become a little too dependent on having her around. But the longer I spoke, the more suspicious and confused the Ice Queen's expression became. And honestly, I started losing confidence myself. My voice grew quieter and quieter. Because the truth about my relationship with the Ice Queen was that it had all started because of an accident. 5 years earlier, everything in my life had been going smoothly until a completely broke intern suddenly entered our company. From that moment onward, the comfortable life I had once enjoyed turned into an absolute disaster. The childhood sweetheart who once promised to take care of me for the rest of my life fell for someone else. She publicly broke off our engagement. And just like that, my dignity was dragged through the mud. Even my normally spoiled and overprotective parents, for once, actually stood on that guy's side instead of mine. I was furious, completely humiliated, desperate to prove that I wasn't some unwanted loser. I made a reckless decision out of spite. I chose the woman everyone feared, the one they called the terrifying female tycoon, the Ice Queen, CEO, Liu Ruoyan. 3 years into our marriage, I went out of my way to make life difficult for my rival, Liu Yi. Yet somehow, every single time, things backfired. Either the Ice Queen discovered my plans before I could act and shut me down, or my own schemes somehow turned around and smashed me directly in the face. Then, recently, I pulled off my biggest attempt yet to frame Liu Yi, and it completely destroyed me instead. My reputation collapsed, and even several of my closest friends cut me off. I knew the Ice Queen had always despised the kind of vicious behavior I had been displaying. So I figured it was only a matter of time. I thought that sooner or later, she would abandon me just like everyone else and kick me while I was already down. So instead of waiting for her to dump me, I decided to make the first move and leave her myself. At least that way, I could pretend I was walking away with some dignity. When I messaged her about the divorce, she was in the middle of an extremely important meeting. Yet she called me back almost immediately. Her voice came through the phone, calm and cold, and I could already tell she was waiting for my explanation. So I deliberately gave her the most obnoxious answer I could think of. I reminded her about that time she had left the bathroom door slightly open. I claimed that I had accidentally seen something embarrassing and tried to use it as an excuse for leaving. I even described it in the most disgusting way possible. Then I pretended that the whole thing had grossed me out, so I wanted out of the marriage. Because if I suddenly admitted that I couldn't bear to leave her, even I wouldn't believe that nonsense. And there was no way the Ice Queen would believe it either. I could barely convince myself. So I asked again whether she was really willing to divorce me. But instead of the cold rejection I expected, the Ice Queen's low voice suddenly snapped me back to reality. She calmly told me that she didn't want the divorce. Not for now. I carefully studied her expression, but there wasn't even the slightest hint of happiness on her face. She simply reached for the divorce agreement sitting on the desk. The document I had only half signed. Then, she calmly fed the entire thing into the shredder. And just like that, the mysterious comments appeared again, mocking my situation. What is going on? Did this guy suddenly grow a brain? Did Chen finally figure things out? Is he finally planning to cling to the Ice Queen's leg and survive? Unfortunately for me, the comments had one thing right. I might already be too late. The hatred she had for me had already taken root, and it was spreading deeper by the day. But who said it was too late? If anything, this was the perfect time. The viewers clearly hadn't noticed what I had. They completely missed the tiny upward curve of her lips when she threw away the divorce agreement. And then there was that shredder. Seriously, I almost died laughing at the comments. They were convinced the Ice Queen was terrified that I would suddenly change my mind and leave her. They kept telling me to stay on course. In fact, they wanted me to push even harder. According to the comments, she was the kind of woman who could destroy anyone without mercy. And apparently, I was the perfect match for her. A shameless bastard with no moral breaks. In other words, the two of us were apparently made for each other. If I could just win her over, the comments claimed, I wouldn't have to worry about fighting the so-called male lead anymore. I spent the entire afternoon trying to make sense of everything that had happened. And eventually, I finally figured it out. The world I had been living in wasn't reality at all. It was the setting of a novel. Liu Yi was the chosen male lead, and I was the villain who had done nothing but make everyone's lives miserable. According to the original story, I would eventually be imprisoned by the Ice Queen and tortured to death. No wonder everyone who got close to Liu Yi ended up being drawn to him. It was as if the entire damn universe had been programmed to revolve around that guy. And after everything I learned that day, my brain was completely overloaded. That night, after taking a shower, I picked up my phone, hoping to shut my brain off for a while. Instead, I was greeted by an avalanche of vicious comments. Almost every social media account I had was flooded with people attacking me. The internet was practically holding a pity party for Liu Yi, defending the so-called perfect male lead. Then my former childhood sweetheart sent me a message. She accused me of thinking she didn't know what I was really doing. She believed I was deliberately using this entire situation to pressure her into leaving Liu Yi and getting back together with me. She thought all my recent moves were just an elaborate scheme. According to her, I was only doing all this because I wanted to see her. She was convinced I was secretly celebrating my own little victory. She even told me to meet her at our usual place that afternoon. I didn't bother replying. E simply blocked her. Then I turned off my phone and let the screen go dark. Meanwhile, the comments kept exploding. I wasn't trying to excuse my behavior, but if we're being honest, there was a reason I had become such a vicious person. It didn't come from nowhere. I had once been a proud heir from a wealthy family, someone who had everything handed to him. Then, practically overnight, my parents, my lover, and my friends all started acting as if I didn't exist, as though they had been hypnotized. All their attention suddenly belonged to another man. Anyone in my position would have snapped. I had money, looks, status, everything. So why the hell was I losing to that guy at every single turn? If I were the author writing this story, I would have made the heroine pay for betraying me. And I definitely wouldn't have let the male lead walk away after only taking a couple of hits. But apparently, the story had already decided I was the villain. The comments even joked that the Ice Queen would eventually lock me away for good. According to the original plot, I would spend the rest of my life trapped underground, completely cut off from the outside world. After finally calming myself down, I decided it was time to sleep. I had just changed into my sleepwear when my bedroom door suddenly swung open. The Ice Queen stood there, staring straight at me. Her gaze traveled downward, stopping somewhere I definitely didn't want her looking. I immediately grabbed my robe and threw it around myself. She apologized and explained that she hadn't realized the door was unlocked. but the way she stared at me made it obvious that she had noticed everything. Dark scales were faintly visible across her body, appearing and disappearing beneath her skin. Apparently, whenever her emotions became too intense, she couldn't completely suppress her true form. The word "get out" was already on the tip of my tongue. Then I saw the comments again. And somehow, I could already predict exactly what they were about to say. They were probably expecting me to put on that arrogant expression I always wore. Then I would dismiss her coldly and tell her to get out of my room. Such a refined gentleman. Too bad he's determined to speedrun his own death. The Ice Queen's feelings for me were apparently being worn away little by little because of the way I treated her. The comments practically begged me to show my wife some kindness for once. They warned that if I treated her badly right now, then someday, when I ended up in that basement, I was going to regret every cruel word that came out of my mouth. Even a split lip would hurt like hell. And apparently, I had no idea how painful that would be. With the comments practically screaming warnings at me, I immediately changed my attitude. I gave the Ice Queen a small smile and softened my voice. "It's okay, honey." She had already started walking out of the room. But she suddenly stopped. She seemed genuinely stunned. Then she waited silently, clearly expecting me to say more. I blamed the comments for repeatedly calling her my wife, and somehow getting into my head. Before I knew it, I had started talking like them. I was internally screaming at myself. The comments were practically begging me to just call her my wife properly, claiming she'd give me everything if I did. They even mocked the male lead, saying he was nothing compared to me. But seriously, could they stop talking about the Ice Queen like she was some cheap prize waiting to be claimed? 3 years of cold treatment had obviously left her with far more hatred for me than love. And besides, did you all forget that in the original story, the Ice Queen eventually imprisoned me just to protect the male lead? She literally kept me locked away until I died. So why are you acting like she's already in love with me? That single point instantly split the comments. Two sides started arguing like it was the final round of a tournament. I raised an eyebrow. Part of me actually wanted to test whether these supposedly all-knowing comments were telling the truth. So I decided to push the situation a little further and tease the Ice Queen about what had just happened. I casually asked her what she thought of my physique. She simply lowered her eyes and gave me a completely neutral answer. Her expression revealed absolutely nothing. The comments immediately called her bluff. Apparently, she was just too stubborn to admit she cared about her husband. They joked that after being married to me for 3 years, it was ridiculous that she could still be hung up on the heroin. According to the viewers, maybe the Ice Queen deserved some of the blame too. I started wondering if I had pushed the teasing too far. Even the comments noticed something strange. Why did I suddenly seem less hostile toward her? Apparently, our dysfunctional villain couple was becoming popular, and somehow our relationship was starting to look suspiciously wholesome. I wasn't ready to give up, so I stepped closer. I pointed out that she hadn't even looked. "How can you know it's ordinary if you didn't even look?" The Ice Queen answered with her usual icy indifference, but I noticed her fingers curling slightly. The faint color appearing around her knuckles gave away the embarrassment she was trying desperately to hide. I honestly wondered how I had never noticed that side of her before. For the first time, I realized that the supposedly untouchable Ice Queen actually looked pretty adorable when she was flustered. Then, I noticed that her hair had become slightly messy. Without thinking, I reached out to straighten it. She immediately stopped me with a cold warning. Her tone was so sharp that I instinctively froze. I just stood there, completely stunned. And suddenly, the argument raging through the comments made a lot more sense. For 3 entire years, I had never once treated the Ice Queen with genuine warmth. Meanwhile, Liu Yi had practically been shining like a sun in her life. He constantly encouraged her, comforted her, and helped her move forward whenever she struggled. So if she hated me, honestly, that was the most normal outcome imaginable. I gave myself a bitter, self-mocking laugh. Then I slowly pulled my hand back. I simply told her to remember to close the door behind her when she left. The Ice Queen closed the door. But she didn't actually leave. Instead, she turned around and slowly walked back toward me. Her breathing became increasingly heavy, and something about the atmosphere suddenly felt wrong. Her eyes were frighteningly red, as though she were desperately trying to suppress something. That was when I finally realized this wasn't normal. I immediately asked her what was wrong. Right on cue, the comments appeared again. They claimed she wasn't sick. She was going through a special physiological cycle. And no, apparently this wasn't something I should misunderstand. The comments told me to stop underestimating how deeply she cared. I had only been teasing her out of curiosity. Yet somehow, my little joke had triggered her special cycle earlier than expected. I repeated the phrase under my breath, still trying to process what I was hearing. We had been married for 3 years. How had I never known about this? I had never even realized the Ice Queen had this condition. The comments immediately roasted me for being completely clueless. Apparently, I had spent all this time assuming she was completely uninterested in romance. The viewers reminded me that she was still a perfectly normal woman with feelings. And considering everything about her appearance and presence, there was no reason to assume she didn't have those desires. The comments insisted that she had simply never wanted to force herself on me. Apparently, during previous cycles, the Ice Queen had secretly taken one of my belongings and kept her distance so I wouldn't notice. She had always made sure to disappear before I could figure out what was happening. Then another comment caught my attention. Apparently, the clothes she had secretly taken had suffered enough already. The viewers were making jokes about how much she had been struggling with her feelings all this time. I just stared blankly at the endless stream of comments. At that point, the screen might as well have been covered in a giant wall of censorship bars. Then a realization hit me. Was that why she had refused to let me touch her earlier? Had it been because of this special cycle? The Ice Queen suddenly leaned against me, clearly struggling to control herself. She shifted uneasily, unable to find a comfortable position. The color in her normally pale complexion had deepened, revealing just how badly she was struggling. Even her unusual features began becoming more visible. The distant, untouchable aura she normally carried had completely disappeared. The irony hit me hard. I had spent so much time obsessing over my rivalry with Liu Yi, and desperately trying to win back my childhood sweetheart, that I had never once truly looked at the woman standing beside me. I had never realized just how striking the Ice Queen actually was. Her features were so refined that she could easily outshine most celebrities on television. Then I remembered something important. There were medicine and medical supplies in the study. I started toward them, but the Ice Queen's broken, hesitant voice stopped me. She desperately tried to conceal what was happening to her. The strange patterns and scales appearing across her body were becoming harder to hide. I looked at her, overwhelmed by how vulnerable she suddenly seemed. She bit her lip so hard that it started bleeding. Sweat had dampened her clothes. She looked exhausted and overwhelmed. For the first time, I truly understood how much she had been hiding from me. And suddenly, I changed my mind. After 3 years of living like strangers under the same roof, I realized that while I wasn't some legendary supernatural creature, I was still a perfectly normal man with perfectly normal emotions. Then I remembered the first rule of our marriage contract. I had written it myself. No emotional involvement, no romantic attachment. Our relationship was supposed to be about money and nothing else, with one strict rule: never take advantage of the other person. And yet, here I was, supposedly the shameless villain of this entire story. At that point, I realized she had no reason to trust me anymore. Once I finally understood what was going on, I gently reached out and touched Liu Ruoyan's cheek. She immediately begged me to stop, insisting that I stay away because she felt dirty. My touch made her entire body tremble. But even then, she desperately clung to the last bit of her restraint. But I had already made up my mind. I slipped off my robe, then wiped the blood from her lips with my fingertip. And I kissed her. The live comments instantly went completely insane. Everyone was asking what the hell was happening. They couldn't believe we had actually crossed that line. The viewers were practically losing their minds. Some of them were even jokingly begging to become her next pet. The entire audience was watching with trembling excitement. After all the chaos between us, everyone thought the so-called evil couple was finally about to take things even further. But the moment our lips met, Liu Ruoyan suddenly took control of the situation. Her warm hand locked tightly around the back of my neck. And before I knew it, she was completely taking the initiative. That woman was seriously something else. Somehow, she had even wrapped a thin black cord around me. She pulled it far too tight. The pressure sent a sharp sting through me. I couldn't help letting out a muffled groan. I tried to push her away and loosen the cord. I told her to stop. And just like that, Liu Ruoyan suddenly seemed to snap back to reality. Her pupils shrank in shock. She desperately tried to hide the signs of how emotionally overwhelmed she had become. Before I could even react, she panicked, turned around, and bolted straight out the door. Then I heard a violent commotion coming from the study next door. Drawers were being frantically opened and searched. A strange medicinal smell began spreading through the air. I had to brace myself against the wardrobe, trying desperately to catch my breath. Meanwhile, the comments on the screen kept rolling like a flood. I couldn't help yelling at Liu Ruoyan, asking why she had run away. I told her to come back instead of freaking out and disappearing. And honestly, judging by the comments, I wasn't the only one feeling sorry for her. Because of her unusual identity, she had spent her entire childhood being bullied and humiliated. She had finally married the man she admired, thinking she had found her salvation, only to discover that even the man she loved seemed disgusted by her true self. The viewers couldn't help wondering how much insecurity she must have carried. And then they started blaming me. They couldn't believe I would choose a moment like this to make her feel rejected for who she really was. According to them, I had practically shattered her heart, but I was seriously being misunderstood. I hadn't meant to hurt her. I was only trying to get her to stop pulling the cord so tightly. The next morning, when I woke up, Liu Ruoyan was nowhere to be found. I sat down and ate my breakfast sandwich, then took a deep breath for 3 seconds before checking my phone. And that's when I noticed something strange. Every single negative comment about me had seemingly vanished overnight. The media outlets that had attacked me the hardest had even had their official accounts completely shut down. Then, one of the few media contacts I still had suddenly sent me a photograph. It showed my parents visiting one of those companies. The message attached to the photo was simple: "It's all taken care of." I couldn't help smiling. I knew my parents weren't really going to abandon me after all. After all, whenever trouble had blown up before, they had always been the ones stepping in behind the scenes to clean everything up. I was still thinking about that when the comments suddenly started appearing again. One viewer pointed out that Liu Ruoyan had quietly helped me every single time. Yet she always handed the credit over to my parents instead. Whenever I was in a good mood, she happily stayed by my side and took care of me. But whenever I became suspicious or started asking questions, she would immediately become distant and cold. The problem was, I still didn't understand any of it, especially after what had happened the night before when I had apparently made her feel completely rejected. The comments said that although she had escaped a divorce for now, she might still be doomed to suffer an even harsher fate. I stared at the comments in shock before shifting my attention back to the phone screen. I stared at the photograph of my parents. For a full 10 minutes, I examined every little detail, and then I finally spotted it. The photo had been edited. I immediately opened WeChat. After scrolling all the way to the bottom of my contacts, I found Liu Ruoyan. I asked if she was free that day. I told her I had something important to discuss. She replied almost instantly, but her response was painfully short. She claimed I had messaged the wrong person. Then, after that initial reply, she took much longer to respond. She finally brought up what had happened the previous night. She apologized. She said she was sorry I had been forced to see such an uncomfortable scene. Then she told me she was extremely busy that day, and if I was thinking about ending our marriage. She told me to contact a lawyer first. I immediately stopped her and told her that wasn't what I meant. I immediately corrected her. This wasn't about getting a divorce. I told her we'd meet that afternoon. Honestly, I nearly laughed at how quickly she had jumped to that conclusion. Apparently, she had no time for a divorce. But if I wasn't divorcing her, then she suddenly had time to meet me that afternoon. Well, that was a close one. Once again, I had narrowly escaped being locked away by the plot itself. Even the viewers started wondering if I had finally realized something was wrong. Maybe I was actually trying to save myself this time. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this particular point in the story was screaming that something terrible was about to happen. I just couldn't remember exactly what it was. That afternoon, I took some extra time to get myself ready. I even arrived half an hour early. I went to a cafe near Liu Ruoyan's company and waited there. I ordered a coffee and a slice of cake, trying to keep my nerves under control. Then I heard someone pull out a chair and sit across from me. I immediately smiled. I happily pushed the cake forward and greeted my wife, but the moment I looked up, my smile completely froze. The woman sitting across from me wasn't Liu Ruoyan. It was Wang Yuyan, who looked at the hairstyle I'd carefully fixed before giving me an amused little smile. She teased me, asking if I really liked her that much. Apparently, I had even started calling her my wife without realizing it. I didn't have time for her nonsense. I stood up and prepared to leave. But Wang Yuyan grabbed the edge of my clothes and refused to let go. I warned her that my actual wife was nearby. She told me to stop pretending. According to her, I was only visiting Liu Ruoyan to make her jealous. She couldn't believe someone as proud as me would genuinely choose to stay with someone she cruelly insulted for being different. She claimed she knew exactly what was happening. For the past 3 years, she insisted, I hadn't even touched Liu Ruoyan. Then her eyes dropped toward my lips, and her expression suddenly darkened. Something about what she saw clearly changed her mood. Her tone turned strangely provocative as she implied that I had finally kissed someone else. I stared at Wang Yuyan. And for the first time, she felt like a complete stranger. I couldn't help wondering when exactly she had changed into this person. It felt like everyone who got involved with Liu Ruoyan eventually became someone I no longer recognized. Wang Yuyan suddenly rose onto her toes. She placed a hand on my shoulder and slowly leaned toward me, and that's when I looked through the cafe window. Standing outside was Liu Ruoyan. There was no point hoping for a miracle anymore. Liu Ruoyan had seen everything. From the moment I accidentally called Wang Yuyan my wife, she had been standing there watching us, and now I was completely screwed. She had heard every single word we said. The viewers were absolutely loving this disaster. A full-blown love triangle battlefield had just spawned, and apparently everyone wanted front row seats. Every time I thought I had finally found a way to survive, I somehow managed to discover the 361st possible way to get myself killed. I used every ounce of strength I had and shoved Wang Yuyan away. Then I sprinted out of the cafe. I saw Liu Ruoyan turning away, and I knew I had only 1 second left. So I reached out and grabbed her wrist. Her eyes immediately locked onto mine. They were almost completely black, dark, cold, and impossible to see through. She calmly asked if that was what I had wanted to tell her. I immediately denied it. I had absolutely no idea why Wang Yuyan had even shown up there. I still couldn't explain why she had suddenly appeared. Then, halfway through my explanation, I suddenly remembered the message Wang Yuyan had sent me before I blocked her. It was Friday. But I had never agreed to meet Wang Yuyan in the first place. I'd been trying to save myself. I deliberately avoided both the main leads. Yet the power of the original plot was apparently far stronger than I'd imagined. Wang Yuyan had just tried to force a kiss on me, and I had immediately rejected her. I shoved her away without hesitation. But when Liu Ruoyan was angry, her gaze was sharp enough to cut straight through me. The colder and more furious she became, the more terrifying the atmosphere felt. Even though I normally knew exactly what to say, my words suddenly started stumbling out one after another. I finally forced myself to explain why I'd asked her to meet me that afternoon. I told her that what happened the previous night had been completely voluntary on my part. When I pushed her away, it wasn't because I was disgusted with her. She had simply been holding me too tightly. I couldn't breathe. That was the only reason I'd reacted like that. I wasn't rejecting her. I said it all in one breath. Then I gathered every ounce of courage I had and looked directly into Liu Ruoyan's eyes. Her pupils were still almost completely black, but slowly they began returning to their normal color. And that was the first time I felt genuine relief. Maybe, just maybe, we weren't doomed after all. Even the viewers were stunned, wondering if I was actually telling the truth. Or maybe they thought I was just playing some ridiculous jealousy game to make the female lead react. Someone in the comments immediately called that idea ridiculous. According to them, I would have to be completely blind to choose anyone else. If I had even half a brain, I'd obviously choose the second female lead. Sure, they admitted that I'd treated her badly during those first 3 years, but apparently that didn't change their opinion. Then Wang Yuyan finally walked out of the cafe. She looked at me, standing beside Liu Ruoyan. She mocked me for being well into my 20s, yet still relying on such childish tricks. She sarcastically asked if I really thought this would make her jealous. I slowly turned toward her. I slipped my fingers between Liu Ruoyan's and intertwined them with hers. Then I locked our hands together, making it crystal clear where I stood. I looked directly at Wang Yuyan. I told her plainly that I didn't like her. I was already married. I had a wife, so I told her to stop bothering me from that point on. But Wang Yuyan casually reminded me that she had already broken up with Liu Yi. According to her, she was single now. She looked at me with an almost careless expression, completely confident that I couldn't possibly reject her. I tried to take another step forward, but I immediately felt resistance. When I looked down, I realized Liu Ruoyan hadn't moved. Instead, she was holding my hand even tighter. Her fingertips were trembling ever so slightly. She was nervous. Wang Yuyan's relationship status had absolutely nothing to do with me. I was starting to lose patience, so I made that very clear. I told her not to bring up being single. Even if she had feelings for someone else, it still had nothing to do with me. I told her to get out of my way. When we were younger, I really had developed feelings for my childhood friend, Wang Yuyan. Back then, those innocent feelings had been real. But things changed. Time after time, she chose Liu Yi's side and kicked me while I was already down. She simply stood there and watched. Whatever little affection I had left for her had already been worn away by everything that happened. All that remained was irritation. The smile on Wang Yuyan's face slowly faded as she finally realized I was serious. I glanced down at my phone. There were already dozens of missed calls. I had originally booked a candlelit dinner for that evening, and I was already half an hour late. At this point, I figured the reservation was probably a lost cause, so I turned to Liu Ruoyan and told her we should just go home. Her limited edition Rolls-Royce was waiting across the street. It was parked right there, ready for us. Once I got into the car, I didn't even bother looking back at Wang Yuyan. The viewers absolutely loved it. Some of them said this was the moment they finally believed me. I genuinely didn't have feelings for the female lead anymore. Others were furious at Wang Yuyan's behavior. She was constantly going back and forth with Liu Yi, while simultaneously keeping an eye on me because of my appearance. And apparently, she had no problem getting physical either. When we finally got home, I sincerely apologized to the restaurant owner for missing the reservation. I even paid double the deposit as compensation. After checking around the house, I realized I needed to explain the situation to the housekeeper. I awkwardly told her what had happened. I had originally planned to take Liu Ruoyan out to dinner, so I'd already let her leave early for the evening. Unfortunately, because everything ran late, the entire dinner plan had fallen apart. I waved it off with a smile and told her it was fine. Then I opened a food delivery app. I suggested ordering takeout instead. I asked Liu Ruoyan what she wanted to eat. She immediately reminded me that takeout wasn't exactly healthy, so I asked her what she wanted instead. I told her I could cook for her if she wanted. She thought about it and chose sweet and sour fish. Liu Ruoyan hesitated for a moment. I suddenly worried that I'd picked something way too difficult to cook. I was already preparing to switch to something simple, like scrambled eggs with tomatoes. But Liu Ruoyan slowly nodded and agreed. So Liu Ruoyan turned on my favorite variety show for me. Then she turned around and headed into the kitchen. Since there was still plenty of time before the show ended its commercial break, I wandered over toward the kitchen to see what she was doing. Through the crack in the door, I saw Liu Ruoyan raise her right hand. It was the same hand I'd been holding just moments earlier. She quietly brought it to her lips and kissed it. Only after that did she start washing her hands and preparing the ingredients. The viewers completely lost it over that tiny moment. Apparently, a villainous couple was one thing, but watching them fall into genuine romance was somehow even more dangerous. Everyone was starting to feel sorry for the second female lead. They saw two miserable people and couldn't understand why neither of us deserved a happy ending. Some viewers were practically ready to send the author death threats with a stack of knives. They were getting tired of watching this so-called evil couple being dragged into forced drama. Honestly, even they thought that if Liu Ruoyan and I could simply live peacefully together, that would already be a pretty good ending. But unfortunately, the male-led plot armor was basically a walking disaster. According to the viewers, Liu Ruoyan was destined to turn against me and side with Liu Yi. That was simply how the story worked. No matter how hard I fought it, the plot refused to let go. And this wasn't the first time I'd seen comments like that. A cold feeling suddenly dropped into my stomach. I couldn't even concentrate on the show anymore. Thankfully, Liu Ruoyan finished cooking the sweet and sour fish just then. I immediately dug in and took several big bites. Then I looked over at Liu Ruoyan, who was sitting quietly beside me. I suddenly remembered the last time I had fallen into the sea with Liu Yi. I had ended up with a fever of 40 degrees. Back then, the plate of sweet and sour fish the housekeeper brought me had actually been made by you, hadn't it? If it weren't for my ice queen reminding me, I would have never realized how deeply she actually cared. After all, being considerate isn't exactly a word in my dictionary. So I pressed her again and asked whether she was also the one who had people delete those nasty comments about me. People were even calling me her Moonlight Man. So naturally, I had to know when this woman had actually started falling for me. I even wondered if we'd somehow known each other before all of this. Then she called my name. It was the first time my ice queen had ever called me by my name like that. I awkwardly pulled my lips into a little pout. Fine. If she said it wasn't true, I'd let it go. Besides, I had already finished eating. I told her to call the other girl, Wang Yuyen, and check whether she had made it home safely. I stepped away from the dining table. Then I picked up my phone. But something felt wrong. A second later, I heard a knife hit the floor. I spun around and saw my ice queen holding her bleeding fingertip. She deliberately looked away from me. Her thick eyelashes trembled ever so slightly. She insisted that she was fine and told me not to worry. Yeah, right? I put my phone down immediately. I grabbed a bandage and some gauze from the first aid kit. Then I sat right back down in front of her. She was bleeding. There was no way I was going to pretend that was nothing. I reached out and told her to give me her hand. And that's when I finally understood something. I suddenly realized why some guys can never recognize a professional attention seeker. That tiny little look in her eyes. Honestly, I could spend an entire lifetime studying Someone even warned her mother not to keep teasing her daughter like that. Apparently, I wasn't exactly normal. Push me too far, and I might actually snap. Apparently, I'd just received the hidden room warning. Once I finished, I told her it was all wrapped up. And because I couldn't resist being playful, I tied the gauze into a ridiculous little bow. She quietly thanked me, trying her best to hide her embarrassment. But her breathing gradually became warmer and heavier. Still, this time, my ice queen clearly had experience dealing with this situation. She tried to escape to the study, but I stopped her and got her to sit back down. I reminded her that I'd read online that taking too much of that medicine could cause problems. Apparently, it wasn't exactly harmless. There were even rumors it could affect a person's intimate health. She blushed furiously as she explained herself. She admitted there could be some side effects, but insisted they weren't nearly as bad as people online claimed. Then, as we stayed close together, those strange markings on her body suddenly appeared again. She immediately tried to cover them by pulling her jacket closed. I stopped her. Instead, I lifted her up and let her sit on my lap. I gently touched the area around her collarbone, where those mysterious markings were barely visible. Honestly, I thought they looked pretty good. She immediately questioned whether I even understood what I was doing. Judging by the way she gritted her teeth, she was absolutely furious. Every word came out through clenched teeth. I wrapped an arm around her waist. Then I gave her my most shamelessly confident look. I reminded her that we were legally married. So whatever happened between us, she didn't need to be afraid of me. Her strange tail curled around me, completely betraying the composure she was trying to maintain. Her warm breath brushed against my ear. She nervously begged me not to push things any further. She warned me that I might regret it. I told her I wouldn't. She kept telling me to stop, Yet that tale of hers was sending a completely different message. Yeah, her mouth was saying no, but her body language was giving me an entirely different answer. At this point, even her mother seemed to be enjoying the chaos. Apparently, this was what happened when two stubborn lovers collided. Our relationship had somehow evolved into the most chaotic romance imaginable. The tension between us finally snapped, and I pulled her into a passionate kiss. I lifted her into my arms. Then I carried her toward the bedroom. And then I let the moment unfold naturally as she clung to me, no longer able to hide her emotions. But beneath all that emotion, my Ice Queen was still blaming herself. She apologized, convinced that she'd somehow tainted something precious between us. I gently wiped away the tears gathering at the corner of her eyes. From there, the night became a blur of overwhelming emotions and intimacy. Apparently, this was the kind of premium content my so-called VIP status couldn't even fully unlock. Meanwhile, the chaotic couple next door seemed determined to turn their own romance into a full-blown disaster. And somehow, I remained completely unfazed. If anything, I was starting to find the whole situation hilarious. Their ridiculously sweet display of affection was so over the top that even I couldn't help laughing. Seriously, the whole thing was absurdly entertaining. But beneath my Ice Queen's cold exterior was a deep-rooted insecurity. She genuinely believed that getting this close to me somehow made her unworthy of the person she admired. Her guilt was completely maxed out. Yet at the same time, her own emotions were becoming impossible to suppress. She couldn't simply switch those feelings off. So she could only remain painfully aware as she slowly surrendered to them. And once we'd crossed that emotional line, I knew my Ice Queen was going to become even more attached to me. At this point, the combination of obsession, possessiveness, and chaotic love had basically stacked every possible buff to max level. I honestly couldn't believe it. I had no idea my Ice Queen's possessiveness toward me could reach such a terrifying level. Her special phase lasted for an entire week. By the final few days, I was completely exhausted. I finally suggested that maybe she should take some medicine. She immediately gave me that clingy, pitiful stare. She looked at me so intensely, you'd think she wanted to burn a hole straight through me. Her voice remained cold, but somehow there was an unmistakable hint of hurt underneath it. Then she quietly called my name. She asked whether I still couldn't accept her like this. Of course, that wasn't the problem. I rubbed my aching lower back. Then I looked at that ridiculously beautiful face of hers and suddenly remembered all the cruel things I'd said to her before. All those insults I'd thrown at her came rushing back. And just like that, I completely lost my temper. I guess that's life. Sooner or later, everyone has to pay the bill for the mistakes they made when they were young. So I accepted my fate and grabbed my bathrobe. I told her I was going to take a shower first. Naturally, my clingy wife immediately followed me. She wanted us to go together. For days, my life had felt less like marriage and more like a luxurious prison sentence. But finally, on the day the first snow arrived, everything began to change. My Ice Queen had to attend a major business banquet. And as her husband, I naturally received an invitation too. Normally, these fancy events were nothing more than drinking, pretending to smile, and exchanging polished nonsense with rich people. I had never cared about any of it. But then I heard that people in the business circle were privately trashing me and desperately hoping I wouldn't show up. That changed my mind instantly. Suddenly, I wanted to go. If they were already annoyed by my existence, then I might as well give them something worth being annoyed about. I got myself dressed and prepared for the show. And after being silent for so long, the mysterious comments finally started appearing again. They warned me to be careful. Apparently, the so-called male lead was going to be at this banquet too. According to the original storyline, this was supposed to be the perfect turning point where the male lead and the second female lead grew closer. Honestly, I didn't get it. Why were more and more people suddenly becoming fans of that guy? Why were so many people still rooting for him? The terrible things he'd done weren't exactly fake. Then again, maybe it was because we were all hopeless romantics. Ordinary working people simply couldn't relate to this kind of ridiculous fantasy. Apparently, the entire world was supposed to fall in love with the useless male lead while ignoring everyone else. Classic Mary Sue nonsense. Everybody worships the chosen guy, no matter how trashy he acts. My ice queen even offered to stay home with me if I didn't want to attend. Then she wrapped her arms around me from behind. I glanced at our reflection in the mirror. A handsome man and a beautiful woman. We looked ridiculously perfect together. Luckily, I wasn't exactly shy about it. I was ready to leave. I'd already mentally prepared myself for running into familiar faces at the banquet. What I didn't expect was for the very first familiar faces I saw to be my own parents. And standing beside them was that so-called struggling adopted son. Except this time, he wasn't dressed like some poor nobody. He was wearing an expensive suit. Yet somehow, he still looked completely out of place among the elites. My mother was even lovingly straightening his clothes for him. Then she noticed me. The so-called adopted son immediately grabbed my mother's arm like they were inseparable. Then he happily called her mom. For a second, I genuinely wondered if I'd heard him wrong. I confronted him, asking why he was calling my mother that. He calmly explained that he'd already accepted her as his godmother. According to him, we'd simply had some misunderstandings and unpleasant history between us. But apparently, none of that mattered anymore. Because according to him, we were all family now. My father looked absolutely delighted. He praised the adopted son for being generous and understanding. He said the kid knew how to value family, unlike me who had grown up with my grandparents. Apparently, that had made me rebellious. And apparently, I'd never been able to become close enough to my own parents. Then the adopted son casually revealed that this banquet was part of his engagement storyline with Wang Yuyan. After thinking about it for a moment, he decided it was better to personally hand something over to me. I accepted what he gave me. Then I casually dropped it straight into the trash. He immediately accused me of going too far. My father turned to me with a stern expression and actually apologized to him on my behalf. I almost laughed. Then I gave them a cold smile. I reminded them that when this guy was together with Wang Yuyan, my own engagement with her hadn't even been officially dissolved. And when they decided to accept him as their godson, not one of them had bothered to ask their biological son's opinion. If they wanted to talk about crossing the line, then this was more than enough to qualify. The adopted son immediately put on that wounded expression. He insisted that he and Wang Yuyan genuinely loved each other and asked what he'd done wrong. He reminded everyone that I'd been away from home for so long. According to him, my parents had been lonely without me, so he'd simply stepped in to take care of them. Then he played the victim, asking why I was determined to target him. I was getting seriously tired of his fake innocence. No amount of pretending that he and Wang Yuyan were truly in love could erase one simple fact. He had still been the one who stepped into someone else's relationship. And one more thing, I didn't choose to stay away from home. Those two were the ones who kicked me out. They even told me they didn't have a son like me. So if you're really as generous and forgiving as you pretend to be, then back when all of that happened, why didn't you step forward and say all this nonsense about forgiving me? With that said, I raised my wine glass and prepared to leave. The adopted son seemed determined to follow me. But somehow, he managed to step on someone's dress. Luckily, I reacted in time and stepped aside. I barely managed to keep my balance. But the wine in my glass went flying. Most of it landed directly on him. The commotion wasn't exactly huge. But it definitely wasn't subtle either. Naturally, everyone nearby immediately turned to look. Even Wang Yuyan and my ice queen ended their conversations and walked over. The whispers started almost instantly. People were already blaming me before anyone even asked what happened. Chen again? They wondered how many times I'd supposedly caused trouble for the adopted son. According to them, I was absolutely heartless. They claimed I'd deliberately knocked him down right in front of everyone. Then they accused me of deliberately throwing wine on him and called it bullying. Apparently, I was so evil that they finally understood why Wang Yuyan would rather marry a broke, average-looking guy like him than choose me. Then, Wang Yuyan and my ice queen both rushed over, asking if everything was okay. For a moment, they spoke almost simultaneously. The difference was obvious. Wang Yuyan was checking on him. My ice queen was checking on me. I told her I was fine. The only thing bothering me was the suit I'd just ruined, a globally limited edition. And replacing it wasn't exactly going to be easy. I complained about the ruined suit with a completely serious expression. My Ice Queen simply told me that as long as I was unharmed, the suit didn't matter. The brand was releasing a new collection soon anyway. We could just buy another one. Then she noticed the weather getting colder, so I shamelessly asked whether I could warm my hands inside the CEO's wallet. Compared to the drama happening across the room, my Ice Queen and I honestly looked like the sane couple. Our so-called villain couple was somehow behaving far more normally than the actual leads. Seriously, the contrast was insane. I hadn't even pushed him. He'd tripped over himself. How's that my fault? And besides, my Ice Queen was my wife. The adopted son slowly got back on his feet, staring at me. Then, looking at my Ice Queen. His face was completely frozen in disbelief. Yeah, this was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Until now, the adopted son had never known my Ice Queen's true identity. She had once been like a little ray of sunshine to him, giving him plenty of warmth and kindness when he needed it. So in his mind, she might have been more important than the so-called male lead. Someone in the background even joked that this warmth probably involved something hilarious. Apparently, he had once mistaken my Ice Queen for a struggling poor woman. He bought her a cup of hot milk, then somehow managed to spill the entire thing all over her. Okay, I had to admit, that was pretty warm. At least in the most literal sense possible. Sometimes I genuinely wondered how that guy had become the male lead. He was covered in luxury brands from head to toe. He hardly looked like someone who couldn't afford a meal. Yet somehow, every woman in this ridiculous story still fell for exactly that act. Wang Yuyan looked at him in confusion. She asked whether he actually knew my Ice Queen. I coldly finished his sentence for him. He remained completely stunned, still trying to process what he'd just learned. He looked at the CEO in disbelief, and finally started putting the pieces together. He realized she'd known all along that I was the person he'd always claimed had bullied him. That realization only made him even more confused. Then he asked whether she really thought what I'd done to him was justified. The adopted son barely curled the corner of his lips. For the briefest moment, a smug flash appeared in his eyes. It disappeared almost instantly. But I caught it. Wang Yuyan had her own reasons too. I'd humiliated her before, and now she clearly wanted to use this opportunity to get even. With everyone important gathered here tonight, she saw the perfect chance to turn the crowd against me. She told me that since everyone was here, I still had time to apologize. I answered without hesitation. I'm a straightforward person. If I do something wrong, I'll admit it. But this time, I had nothing to apologize for. He could scheme against me, retaliate against me, do whatever he wanted. But I wasn't going to bow my head and apologize. Seriously, was the male lead's plot armor really this ridiculous? First, my parents turned against me. Now, was my wife supposed to switch sides too? Was I really going to end up alone? After everything my villain couple and I had fought through? After everything I had done, was I really destined to end up hated by everyone? I mean, seriously, don't panic. I admit I once joked about enjoying being locked up. Maybe I was just talking tough back then. But as someone who ships these two, I still wanted them to get their happy ending. Especially that supposedly secondary, I had to admit. I had completely become his fan. I thought everything I had been through had already hardened me. I thought I was strong enough to stay calm no matter what happened. But the moment she took my hand, my heartbeat instantly went berserk. The Ice Queen beside me tightened her grip and finally spoke. She admitted that I had definitely done some things wrong. She wasn't pretending I was some morally perfect saint. I had my spoiled rich kid moments. I could be arrogant. And sometimes I acted without thinking twice. But according to her, so what? She loved me. That was the only part that mattered to her. Everything everyone else saw was just the process. But from her perspective, I was the best man in the entire world. And then came the words I never expected to hear. For the first time, I heard her openly admit that she loved me. The second those words landed, the entire banquet erupted into an uproar. Meanwhile, the self-righteous hero looked absolutely sick. He couldn't understand how she could possibly defend me like this. But if he wanted everyone to judge things fairly, then she decided it was time to answer one question first. Why hadn't he answered the questions I asked him earlier? Why did he interfere with my relationship with the heiress, even when the two of us still had a marriage arrangement? Why did he deliberately sabotage my relationship with my parents? And even turn my friends against me? Why did he try to take my place? Did he seriously believe none of those things were wrong? Because whether he admitted it or not, he still chose to do them. And if I were truly the monster he claimed I was, I could have exposed every single one of his dirty little secrets. Before judging someone else, maybe he should have taken a good look at himself first. Was he really as innocent and spotless as he pretended to be? Before demanding that someone else apologize, he should first ask himself whether he could honestly live with his own actions. The hero was completely speechless. After struggling for what felt like forever, he finally muttered a desperate excuse. He tried to claim that the real third wheel was simply whoever wasn't loved. Even the heiress and her parents couldn't buy that ridiculous logic. His argument was so weak that he couldn't even defend it properly. Every attempt at a comeback died before it even left his mouth. I've already told him he was free to come after me if he wanted revenge. But personally, I strongly recommended against it. Of course, anyone with a death wish was welcome to test that recommendation. With that, I ended the banquet on my terms. I wished everyone an enjoyable evening. Then I casually pointed out one small problem. My suit had been ruined. So, naturally, my wife calmly raised her glass and made it clear that someone would be paying for it. Her gesture looked perfectly polite, but her eyes were colder than a frozen blade. Around the edge of the banquet stood an entire line of huge, muscular men with military posture. Not a single one looked like an ordinary bodyguard. My wife simply nodded. The pressure in the room instantly skyrocketed. That was the first time I truly saw the woman beside me for what she was. The queen of the underworld, who apparently had connections on both sides of the law. Until that moment, I had always thought people were exaggerating about her. Now, I realized those stories hadn't been jokes at all. If we had actually married 3 years ago, I probably would have discovered this terrifying side of her much sooner. And honestly, I might have panicked on the spot. Because no matter how badly I wanted to annoy that toxic ex, it wasn't worth literally gambling my life. I couldn't help staring at the men surrounding us. I quietly asked if those guys were her bodyguards. She simply took my hand and led me out of the banquet hall. I couldn't understand why I had never seen them before. She explained that she didn't usually bring them along, which naturally made me wonder why tonight was different. Her answer was almost ridiculously casual. She brought them to have my back. If the hero or the heiress dared to attack me, I wanted to know whether her people would actually step in. She calmly told me that one punch from those bodyguards would probably take half their life bar. And if anyone was stupid enough to attack me, then that was simply the price they chose to pay. No warnings, no negotiations, just consequences. The so-called evil couple. Yeah, at this point, we were absolutely earning that title. Then I suddenly remembered something about my wife. Lately, she had been acting so gentle around me that I had almost forgotten her true nature. This woman was still the terrifying little psychopath capable of crawling through the darkness just to ruin someone's day. And then I discovered something that completely changed the story. Apparently, the latest version of the novel had received a major update. The evil couple had somehow become the actual male and female leads. Looks like even the author finally realized just how insanely popular this pair had become. I never actually saw either of them being imprisoned or mistreated. But judging by those chains around the two of them, and all those little toys lying around, they definitely weren't living a boring life. Chen and Liu Ruoyan, those two poor souls. I hope you two live happily ever after. That was the last comment I saw flash across the screen. I knew those people could never hear my reply. but I still answered quietly anyway. Thanks, we will. After that, Liu Ruoyan and I decided to take a break from the chaos. So we started playing a little rapid-fire Q&A game. Outside, the winter night was brutally cold, but inside the villa's hot spring, Liu Ruoyan and I were soaking in complete comfort. And since things were getting a little too peaceful, I decided to stir up some fun. While massaging Liu Ruoyan's feet after her long day in high heels, I casually threw her a question. Her ankles were clearly exhausted. She gave me a faint, almost mysterious smile. I asked if I had really been her moonlight man. Then I asked her the question I'd been curious about for years. When did she actually fall for me? She admitted it might have started when she was 13. Maybe even earlier than that. Back then, she had inherited the same unusual physical condition as her mother. Once her family discovered it, they forced her to take medication and tried to suppress it. They even made her wear all kinds of strange outfits just to hide her condition from everyone. At school, though, I was the only person willing to approach her. That suddenly brought an old memory back to me, and then I finally remembered. She was that quiet girl from class 10, the one who always kept to herself. She practically never spoke to anyone. Back then, I honestly thought she was some mute girl obsessed with cosplay. But I was a member of the school's discipline committee. So naturally, I decided I had to look after her a little more than everyone else. Still, there was one thing I couldn't understand. If she had liked me for so long, why never make a move? There were plenty of talented and outstanding people around me. She said she didn't want to become a burden or get in my way. Then she immediately moved on to the next question she asked, when I had lied most recently. And right then, Liu Ruoyan slowly moved closer to me. She gently ran her hands across my skin, as if she didn't want to miss a single inch. Then she finally revealed what she really meant by that question. She wanted me to belong to her alone. She wanted to be the only person in my eyes. My happiness, my anger, my love, my hatred, every emotion I had, she wanted all of it to be hers. I couldn't help asking why she never actually did that. She admitted she'd thought about it recently, but she simply couldn't bring herself to do it. So I asked what had stopped her. The moment divorce was mentioned, Liu Ruoyan's voice suddenly became faint and hoarse. Even her tail began gently tapping against the surface of the water. I raised an eyebrow. Before she could finish, I cut her off. I told her that I loved her, even if I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment my feelings began. I couldn't name a specific date or some dramatic turning point when everything changed. But there was one thing I knew for certain. I loved her. The rest of my words simply got stuck in my throat. The water around us rippled outward in endless circles. And somehow, I thought I heard Liu Ruoyan quietly crying. But she didn't know something. I had also told a small lie of my own. I told her that I'd been abandoned by my parents when I was young, left behind in the care of my elderly grandparents. I had practically no one around me. Not even someone my own age I could truly talk to. I had plenty of material comforts growing up. But all that wealth came with one brutal trade-off: absolute emotional poverty. At the age when I needed love and companionship the most, I had almost none. That's why, deep down, I had always craved a love that would never betray me. A love that would stay intense forever. And somewhere along the way, I realized there was only one person who could give me that: Liu Ruoyan. So maybe I was always destined to fall in love with her and spend the rest of my life sinking into this love together.